A poor young woman was crying at a grave. What happened next will warm your heart and bring tears to your eyes. Keep watching, because this stranger's question changed two lives forever. The late afternoon sky was heavy with clouds. The kind that promise rain but never delivered. A cold breeze moved through the tall trees lining the quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town, sweeping dry leaves across the winding stone paths. Everything was still, except for the occasional rustle of wind whispering through the bare branches overhead. Elara knelt alone beside a small, unadorned grave. There was no photograph, no marble headstone, just a weathered plaque embedded in the ground, partially hidden beneath brittle leaves. Her long blonde hair, softly curled, spilled from beneath the hood of her worn coat. The fabric was faded and fraying at the sleeves. Her eyes were red, puffy from crying. She clutched a canvas tote close to her chest, the kind that had seen better days. The fabric was thin, the seams stretched, and every now and then the corner of a greeting card peeked out from the top. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped her face with the back of one sleeve, then reached down to brush some leaves from the grave marker. She did it gently, as if tending to someone she knew. Behind her, steady footsteps crunched softly against the gravel. A tall man in his late 30s stopped just a few feet away, holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums wrapped in plain brown paper. His coat was simple but tailored, and his expression unreadable. He stood silently for a moment, gazing at the same grave. Then, in a voice low and calm, he spoke. "This is my wife's grave," he said. "Who are you? Why are you crying here?" Elara startled. She turned quickly, eyes wide, her face going pale. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she scrambled to her feet, brushing off her knees, her voice faltering with shame and panic. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know this belonged to. I wasn't trying to." She swallowed. "I didn't mean to intrude." The man didn't move forward, but lifted one hand in a small, non-threatening gesture. "I'm not angry," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I just want to understand what brought you here today." Elara froze for a moment, gripping her bag tighter. The card inside crinkled as her fingers pressed against it. Her gaze dropped to the ground, and for a second, it seemed like she might walk away. But something in the quiet of his tone, or perhaps the stillness with which he waited, made her stop. She slowly lowered herself back down to the ground, her eyes still fixed on the plaque. She let out a long breath. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said finally. Her voice was soft, but not weak. "I just needed to be here." John said nothing. He simply remained where he was, the flowers still in his hand, his face unreadable but open. Elara looked back down at the grave, her expression distant, like she was seeing a memory instead of a patch of grass and stone. And in that silence, thick with unspoken questions, something shifted. There was a story waiting there. One he hadn't asked for, one she hadn't planned to tell. But it was about to unfold right there in the stillness between grief and gratitude. The silence between them lingered, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It felt necessary, like something old and delicate was being carefully unwrapped. Elara's eyes stayed on the grave as she began to speak. "I was 19, she said, her voice slow, almost hesitant. "I had just lost everything. My parents had cut ties. I had no friends left. I was living in my car, barely eating. Every morning I woke up and wondered if it would be easier to just stop trying." John stood quietly beside her, listening. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves again. "I got a part-time job answering phones at a small nursing home," she continued. "Not because I wanted to work. I just needed somewhere warm, somewhere with food." Her fingers traced the rim of the canvas bag in her lap. "There was this woman, older, gentle, with the kindest smile. She wasn't a patient. I think she volunteered. She came in a few days a week, helped serve lunch, or just sat and talked with the residents." Her voice grew softer. "She noticed me one afternoon. I was crying in the dining room after everyone had left. I thought I was alone, but she came over and placed a warm cup of tea in front of me. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to fix anything. She just said, "Today feels impossible, but tomorrow might surprise you." John felt his chest tighten. He knew that tone. He could hear his wife's voice in it. Elara wiped at her cheek and gave a watery smile. After that, she kept showing up. Not just for the residents, but for me. She'd bring little things, crossword books, a candy bar, a scarf once when she noticed I didn't have one. I never told her how bad things were, but somehow she knew. Her voice trembled. There was a night I didn't think I'd make it. I'd written a letter. I had a plan. But she showed up after hours. Said she had a bad feeling. She found me sitting in the back hallway with a bottle of sleeping pills. Elara paused, blinking back tears. She didn't yell. She didn't panic. She just sat down next to me and held my hand. She stayed the whole night. John's breath caught almost inaudibly. She saved my life, Elara whispered. There was a long silence. I didn't even know her name, she said finally. I only called her Miss Lily. I thought she was just passing through. One day, she stopped coming. I assumed she'd moved or, well, you know. Her eyes dropped to the bag in her lap where the greeting card still peeked out. 3 years later, I saw her photo in a newspaper, an obituary. That's how I found out her name was Lily Grant. John slowly knelt beside the grave, the bouquet still in his hands. I recognized her instantly, Elara said. I came here the next week, left a flower, told her what I'd been doing. I had a daughter by then, a job, a small place of my own. And every month since I come back to say thank you, she finished quietly. John didn't speak. Not at first. His eyes were on the plaque, unmoving. Then carefully, he placed the bouquet down. I didn't know, he said at last, his voice raw. She never told me about you or the others she helped. I thought I knew her so well. He looked at Elara not with suspicion or confusion, but with something that looked almost like awe. She always said she wanted to leave something behind that mattered, he added. I just didn't realize she already had. His gaze returned to the grave, and for the first time in years, the pain behind his eyes softened. What he felt wasn't just grief now. It was pride. They sat there side by side as the wind moved gently across the grass. And in the quiet that followed, something between them began to shift. Something unspoken, but deeply understood. That evening, the sky over the small town had turned a soft charcoal, streaked with fading blues and hints of gold. The streets were mostly quiet, shops closing one by one, their warm lights blinking out like distant stars. John walked beside Elara along the sidewalk. The silence between them no longer tense, just gentle. I think, he said finally, my wife would have liked the idea of me inviting one of her old friends to dinner. Elara gave a small, surprised smile. Friend might be a bit generous. He glanced over at her. She helped you during the worst moment of your life. You've been visiting her grave for years. That sounds like friendship to me. They turned a corner and entered a quiet little cafe tucked between two antique stores. It wasn't fancy, just warm. Wooden floors, old jazz humming in the background, soft lighting. The kind of place you didn't feel judged for being tired. They sat at a booth near the window. A waitress brought 2 cups of coffee and menus, then left them in peace. John removed his coat, but stayed otherwise quiet, letting Elara set the pace. She stirred cream into her coffee absently, her gaze resting somewhere just beyond the window. My daughter's name is Maisie, she said. She just turned 4 last week. John nodded. That's a lovely name. She's everything, Elara continued, a softness in her voice that only came from someone who had clung to love like a lifeline. I work a few jobs, whatever I can get. Flower stand on weekends, grocery deliveries on my bike. Sometimes I clean houses. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. John watched her as she spoke. Her fingers wrapped around the mug were rough at the edges. Small blisters near her thumb, calluses on her palm. These weren't the hands of someone coasting through life. These were hands that had carried weight, literal and emotional. "I'm not telling you this for pity," she added quickly, reading something in his silence. It feels good to talk to someone who knew her. Even if you didn't know that version of her. I appreciate you sharing it," John said. "And I'm not feeling pity, just respect." She blinked, surprised. "I've met a lot of people who talk about hard work," he said. "Very few who live it." There was a pause during which they both sipped their coffee. John reached into his coat pocket and took out a small cream-colored business card. He slid it across the table. "I don't know what your life looks like day to day. I won't pretend to understand every struggle. But if you ever need something, anything, you can call me." Elara hesitated, eyeing the card. "It's not charity," John added. "It's not even about me. It's about her. She gave you a second chance once. I think she'd want me to offer the same." Elara picked up the card with careful fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't take help lightly." "I can tell," he replied. They left the cafe a short while later. The night had grown colder, and Elara pulled her coat tighter as they stepped outside. "I should head home," she said. "Maisie's with my neighbor tonight. I don't like to stay out too long." John nodded. "Of course. Thank you for the conversation." As she turned to go, she paused and looked back. "You said earlier that you didn't know your wife did those things for others. Maybe she didn't tell you because it wasn't about her. Maybe she just wanted people to feel seen. That was enough for her." John didn't reply. He simply watched as Elara disappeared down the street, her silhouette eventually swallowed by shadow and street light. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets and looked up at the night sky, thinking of Lily, of kindness unspoken, and of strangers who carried pieces of the people we've lost. For the first time in years, the evening didn't feel so heavy. The winter wind howled louder than usual that night. In the cramped back seat of her aging sedan, Elara held Maisie close, wrapping the little girl in every layer she had. The engine was off. Gas was too expensive to waste. And her own coat, thin and fraying, barely held back the cold. Frost clung to the windows. Her breath came in shallow clouds. Maisie shifted in her sleep, murmuring something about a pink blanket and cupcakes. Elara kissed her forehead, trying not to let her teeth chatter. She had tried everything, called friends, begged the landlord to give her one more week. But the building had been sold without warning, and the new owner had cleared out every tenant who could not pay up front. Elara had never wanted to be here. Not again. She looked down at her phone, her fingers stiff from the cold, hovering over one name in her contacts. John Grant. She hesitated. It had been weeks since that morning at the cafe. They had not spoken since. He had offered help, yes, but did he really mean it? She looked at Maisie again, her little face pale, lips dry. Elara swallowed her pride and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" His voice was groggy. He had been sleeping, but alert. "It's me," Elara said, barely holding it together. I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call." A pause then. "Where are you?" 30 minutes later, headlights cut through the dark side street. John pulled up behind her car, stepped out into the icy wind without a coat. He walked straight to the driver's side and gently tapped the window. Elara rolled it down halfway. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, ashamed of every moment leading to this one. John didn't answer with words. He just opened the door, reached into the back seat, and lifted Maisie into his arms like she was made of glass. The child stirred, blinking up at him before snuggling into his chest. Then he turned to Elara, draping his long wool coat over her shoulders, before guiding her toward his vehicle. By the time they reached his home, a quiet property on the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees and silence, Maisie was asleep again. John led them past the main house to a small guest cottage in the back. It was separate, cozy, warm. The lights flickered on gently as he opened the door. There's heat, hot water, food in the fridge, he said softly. You can stay here as long as you need. Elara stood in the doorway, blinking back tears she didn't want to shed. You don't even know me, she said. You don't have to do this. John looked at her. I know enough, he said. And I know Lily would have done the same. He nodded toward the small bedroom. Go get her warm. I'll bring some blankets. Elara gave Maisie a warm bath, letting the hot water melt the chill from her little fingers. She dressed her in a pair of soft pajamas she found folded on the dresser, exactly her size. When she stepped back into the bedroom, something stopped her cold. A new teddy bear with about the color of strawberry cream sat waiting on the pillow. Tucked under its arm was a small note. For when you miss the sun. And just above the bed, outside the small window, a wind chime swayed gently in the night breeze. It was simple wooden with silver accents. But when it moved, it gave off a soft, warm sound. Elara stared at it for a moment, recognizing it from a photo she had once seen in the newspaper. A tribute piece about John's late wife. It had been her favorite. John didn't say a word about it. He simply returned a few minutes later with hot tea and an extra pair of socks for Elara. She took them in silence, hands trembling, not from cold now, but from something heavier. Gratitude. She hadn't asked to be saved. But he had shown up anyway. And in the stillness of that night, Elara felt something shift. Not safety, not certainty, but maybe for the first time in years, a beginning. The cottage behind John Grant's house was small but warm. And in just a few days, Maisie had already claimed it as her adventure space. She followed John like a duckling, especially in the mornings when he tended his garden. She would skip beside him in her pink dress, asking serious questions like, do carrots get lonely underground? And, can worms talk to each other? John answered all of them with patient amusement. You ask more questions than most journalists I've met, he teased one morning, kneeling beside a tomato plant. Maisie shrugged. That's because I'm not a journalist. I'm four. Elara watched them from the porch. Seeing her daughter laugh so freely, it stirred something quiet and long lost inside her. Later that week, Maisie decided to bake. She insisted on doing it all by myself. And with a mix of trust and mild panic, Elara let her. The cookies came out slightly burned and wildly uneven. Don't say anything, Maisie warned as she handed a plate to John. Just eat it. If you don't throw up, I'll make more. John bit into one with a straight face. Well? Maisie asked, arms crossed. He nodded solemnly. Tastes like bravery and a little too much salt. Maisie giggled, delighted. Inside, Elara smiled to herself. It had been a long time since laughter felt this natural. That night, Elara tucked Maisie into bed and sat beside her for a few minutes. You like being here? She asked softly. Maisie nodded under the blanket. Mr. John listens. Grown-ups don't usually listen. Elara brushed a curl from her daughter's cheek. Yeah, he really does. A few days later, while Maisie was napping on the couch with a storybook half open on her chest, Elara turned to John. I've been looking at places to rent, she said. I think we'll move out soon. I don't want to impose. John looked at her carefully, then shook his head. You're not imposing. Still, she hesitated. This was never meant to be permanent. I don't want to make things complicated. He paused for a moment, then said, What if I offered you a job? She blinked. Sorry? At the foundation, he continued. Lily's foundation. I need someone to manage outreach, coordinate events, respond to requests. You understand these people. You've lived what they're going through. All was quiet. But I don't have a degree in anything. I'm not official. You're real, he replied. That matters more. He didn't say it with pity. Just calm belief. After a long beat, she nodded. Okay, I'd like that. The days that followed were peaceful. Elara took to the work with quiet focus. She managed schedules, answered calls, and even helped reorganize a few community programs. John watched how she handled people with kindness, clarity, and strength. There was no pretense in her. And then there were the quiet moments. Like that one afternoon when the light filtered through the cottage window. Maisie was asleep on the sofa, her little arm draped over her favorite teddy bear. Elara was at the small table reviewing some paperwork. A pencil was tucked behind her ear, and her blonde curls were loose around her shoulders. John walked in with 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her, sat across without a word, and sipped his. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. After a while, Elara looked up and caught his gaze. She smiled just a little. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a declaration. But it felt like something soft had settled between them. Something that didn't need to be spoken. It felt quietly like the beginning of home. The afternoon sun spilled a gentle light across the garden, casting long shadows over the trimmed hedges and rows of lavender. Elara and Maisie had planted together. Elara wore gardening gloves, her blonde curls tucked under a sun hat. Maisie, in her pink dress, now stained with soil, was giggling as she watered a patch of wild flowers. It was peaceful. Then a car door slammed in the distance. Elara looked up, wiping her brow. A woman in her early 30s stepped through the front gate. Sharp heels on the stone path, a structured black coat despite the warmth, and eyes that froze the air around her. She had the same high cheekbones John did, the same icy poise, but none of his gentleness. Celeste! John's voice called from the porch. He had stepped out the moment he saw her pull in, already tense. Celeste didn't even glance at him at first. Her eyes were locked on Elara. Then they dropped to Maisie. I see, she said coldly. So this is what time to grieve looks like. Elara stood up slowly, confused. I'm sorry. You're living here. Celeste's voice rose. With your child. Maisie hid behind Elara's legs. John came closer. Celeste, don't do this. No, John, she snapped. You don't get to tell me what to do after this. She turned to Elara again. Do you know who I am? Elara hesitated. I'm sorry. No, I'm Lily's sister. The name hit like a quiet blow. Elara's breath caught. Her hands instinctively reached for Maisie's shoulders. I didn't mean to. She started. Celeste cut her off. Don't pretend you didn't know whose place you were taking. My sister's grave is barely settled. And you've moved someone else into her home with a child. John stepped between them, firm but calm. Celeste, stop. This is not what you think. Oh, really? Celeste's voice trembled with restrained fury. Then explain what I'm looking at, John. Because all I see is a man who made promises at a graveside. And forgot them the moment something blonde and sad came along. Elara flinched. John inhaled slowly. She's not replacing Lily. She never could. Celeste turned her stare on him. Then why is she here? You promised me. You said no one else would walk through that door. You said this would remain Lily's home. Her memory would be protected. There was a beat of silence. Maisie, sensing the tension but not understanding it, tugged softly at Elara's sleeve. Are we in trouble, Mommy? Elara crouched, whispering. No, sweetie. Not at all. But inside, something was unraveling. She looked at Celeste, at John, and then down at the little hands wrapped around hers. The last thing she wanted was to be a wound in someone else's healing. Without another word, Elara gently picked up the gardening basket and took Maisie's hand. Excuse me, she murmured, her voice low. John moved as if to stop her, but her eyes said, Not now. She walked back toward the cottage, her steps heavy, her heart heavier. Later that evening, the sun dipped low, casting long orange streaks through the windows. John stood in the foyer, hands in his pockets, staring at the hallway that led to the guest house. He felt torn in a way he hadn't in years. Celeste had every right to grieve, to protect Lily's memory. She had stood by his side at the funeral. She had sat beside him on nights when he couldn't speak without shaking. But Elara had brought life back into this house without even meaning to. Not noise, not chaos, just breath. And now it felt like both worlds were at war inside his chest. He heard the door open behind him. Celeste stepped in quieter now. Her eyes were no longer icy, but tired. "I know you loved her," she said. "I still do." "Then why?" John turned slowly. "Because Lily taught me how to love quietly. To show up when it's hard, to be kind even when you're hurting." He paused. "She would have liked Maisie." Celeste's mouth tightened. She didn't respond. She only whispered, "Then you'll have to choose what memory you want to live in." And with that, she left, leaving John standing alone, surrounded by silence, with two worlds pulling at his heart, and a woman in the garden who never asked for any of it, yet somehow held everything together. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was hollow. John stepped into the guest house just after sunrise, a mug of tea in hand, only to find the door slightly ajar. The bed was made. The toys were gone. The little pink shoes by the doorway no longer there. On the kitchen table lay a folded note. He opened it with shaking fingers. "I never wanted to be the shadow that made you choose. Thank you for letting us stay. That was more than enough. Elara." His chest tightened. For a long moment, he stood still as if movement would make it real. Then in one motion he turned, grabbed his keys, and ran. The bus stop at the edge of town was nearly empty. The morning mist still hung low, curling around the bench, where Elara and Maisie sat with two small bags between them. Maisie leaned against her mother, half asleep, thumb in mouth. Elara looked like she had not slept at all. When she heard footsteps pounding against the concrete, she turned. "John!" He stopped short, breath catching in his throat. Without a word, he dropped to one knee in front of Maisie, wrapping his arms around her like something precious he had almost lost. Maisie blinked, then smiled sleepily and hugged him back. Elara watched, frozen, her hand tightening around the bus ticket in her pocket. When John finally stood, he faced her. Not as the composed man she'd always known, but as someone who had something to lose, and knew it now. "I thought I was done," he said softly. "That part of my life, love, family. I told myself there was no space for anything more." His voice cracked slightly. "But when you and Maisie came into my world, it was like I could breathe again. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't expect anything. And still you gave me something I didn't think I'd feel again." He stepped closer. "I don't want you to go, Elara. Not because I feel sorry for you. Not because of Lily. But because He paused, his voice barely a whisper. "I need you here, you and Maisie." Elara's eyes shimmered. She opened her mouth, but no words came, just breath. And in that moment, she realized what she had been waiting for all her life. Wasn't a man to rescue her, but someone brave enough to choose her fully and without hesitation. Maisie tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, can we go back home now?" Elara looked at John. "Home?" She nodded, her voice finally returning. "Yes, baby, we can." That afternoon, John made a phone call. When Celeste answered, he didn't flinch. "I need you to come with me," he said simply. To his surprise, she agreed. He didn't take her to the house. He took her to the cemetery. The sky was gray again, just like the day he first met Elara. They stood in front of Lily's grave. Elara, Maisie, John, and Celeste. John placed a fresh bouquet of lilies down. Then he stepped back, took Elara's hand in his, and said aloud, "If you're still watching, Lily, I want you to know something." His voice was steady now. "I didn't forget you. I never could. But I think you would have wanted me to keep living. And this," he gestured to Elara and Maisie, "this feels like living again." Celeste stood a few paces away, arms folded. She didn't speak, but her eyes had softened. Maisie crouched and placed a tiny pink flower next to the bouquet. "For the lady who gave Mommy tea," she said quietly. Elara blinked back tears. And for the first time, the grief didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge, a way forward together. It was the night before Daddy and Me Day at school. Maisie stood by the kitchen table, her tiny hands gripping a card she had made from pink construction paper. There were glitter smudges on her cheeks, and a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures on the front. Elara was rinsing dishes when she felt a tug at her sleeve. "Mommy," Maisie whispered, "can I give this to Mr. John?" Elara dried her hands, slowly crouched down. "Of course, baby. Do you want me to help you write something inside?" Maisie shook her head. "I already did." The next morning, John walked into his office to find the card waiting on his desk. He opened it carefully. Inside in crooked letters was written, "Dear Mr. John, if you can't come to Daddy and Me Day, I'll just tell my friends that my dad is a superhero and too busy saving the world. But if you do come, then I don't have to lie anymore. Love, Maisie." John's throat tightened. He read it twice, once with surprise, once with something deeper. Then he placed the card gently on his desk and reached for his suit jacket. When John walked into the school gym later that day, he wore a charcoal gray suit, and on his lapel was a small pink button. Maisie had given it to him that morning, saying, "You have to wear it. It's our team color." Her eyes lit up the moment she saw him across the room. She ran straight into his arms, nearly knocking him off balance. "You came," she beamed. "I wouldn't miss it." He smiled. They joined a circle of kids and parents sitting on colorful rugs. The teacher began asking the children to share something about their dads or their dad for the day. When it was Maisie's turn, she stood up, smoothed her dress, and held John's hand tightly. "My daddy," she said proudly, "helps my mommy believe in love again." The room went silent. Some parents smiled. A few wiped their eyes. John looked at Elara, who stood just inside the doorway. Her hand covered her heart. She smiled, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. That evening, the sky burned gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. John, Elara, and Maisie sat together on the front porch of the guest house that no longer felt temporary. The wind carried a cool breeze, rustling the wind chime, gently hanging by the door. Lily's favorite. Maisie held a plate of lumpy, slightly overbaked cookies. "These are special," she announced. "One for each of us, but mine has the most chocolate chips." John chuckled. "That sounds fair." He reached for a cookie and handed one to Elara. They sat quietly watching Maisie chase fireflies barefoot in the yard. Then Elara reached over and took John's hand. Her voice was soft. "I know some wounds never go away, but sometimes someone's hand is warm enough to help you live with them." John turned toward her, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. He didn't speak, but his silence was full of everything he didn't need to say. Inside the house, above the mantel, hung a framed drawing in bright crayon colors. 3 figures stood beneath the sun holding hands. One was tall with glasses. One had long yellow hair, and one wore a pink dress. Beneath it, in clumsy but determined handwriting, it read, "We didn't find family, we became one." And outside the wind chime danced again. Light, simple, and whole. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. And hit the like button to support our channel. We believe in the quiet kind of love. The kind that shows up, stays, and heals. New stories every week. Always real, always human. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the family you need is the one you choose. See you in the next story.